It was supposed to be a day of celebration and relief, the final bell ringing not just to signify the end of the day, but the end of another school year at Hawthorne High. However, as the first light of dawn crept through the curtains of classroom 12B, a peculiar sense of dread settled over the room. The usually boisterous hallways were silent, unnervingly so. Jenny, a senior, was the first to notice something amiss when she arrived early to help decorate the halls for the final assembly. As she strung banners across the lockers, the fluorescent lights flickered, casting strange shadows that seemed to dance in the corners of her eyes. Dismissing it as a trick of the light, she continued her task, unaware of the eyes watching her from the end of the hallway. By the time other students began to arrive, a thick fog had enveloped the school grounds, obscuring the view outside and muffling sounds. Inside, students spoke in hushed tones, a collective unease growing among them. Even the teachers seemed wary, their smiles tight and forced as they ushered students into their classrooms. During what was supposed to be a joyful final assembly in the gym, the power went out, plunging the room into darkness. Screams echoed as the emergency lights struggled to pierce the blackness. When the lights flickered back on, a student from the back row was missing. His friends claimed he had gone to the bathroom moments before the blackout, but he was nowhere to be found. The principal tried to calm the panicked students, assuring them it was just a power surge and that the missing student had probably returned to class. However, the atmosphere had shifted. The day of celebration had turned somber. Classes resumed, but the feeling of dread hung heavy in the air. As the final bell rang, instead of the usual cheers, there was a hurried silence as students quickly packed their bags. Jenny, feeling uneasy, decided to check the bathrooms for the missing student one last time. As she neared the bathroom, the lights in the hallway dimmed, and she heard what sounded like whispering coming from inside. Pushing the door open slowly, the whispering stopped abruptly, replaced by a cold gust of air that made her shiver. Stepping inside, Jenny called out, but there was no response. The bathroom seemed empty, yet a stall door was slightly ajar. As she approached to push it open, the lights flickered violently, and the door slammed shut on its own. Jenny stumbled back, her heart racing, as she heard the whispering start again, louder this time, surrounding her, coming from nowhere and everywhere. Terrified, she turned to run, but as she did, the floor beneath her began to tremble. The walls of the bathroom cracked, tiles falling like rain, and a deep, dark hole appeared where the stall once stood. The whispering turned into a chorus of eerie voices calling her name, beckoning her to come closer. Jenny's scream echoed through the empty school as she stood on the brink, staring into the abyss that had opened in the heart of Hawthorne High. As Jenny stood paralyzed, staring into the gaping void, the school trembled again, more violently this time. Plaster dust rained down, and the voices grew louder, their tone urgent. Despite her terror, a strange compulsion urged her forward. Deep within, she felt an inexplicable pull towards the darkness. Back in the gym, the students were slowly leaving, discussing in low tones the bizarre events of the day. The missing student was now a topic of whispered rumors and wild conjectures. Amidst the chaos, Mark, Jenny's best friend, noticed her absence. Panic rising, he remembered Jenny mentioning her plan to check the bathrooms. Without a second thought, he rushed out of the gym, heading towards the bathrooms. The hallways were nearly deserted now, the fog outside casting a surreal glow through the windows. As Mark neared the bathroom, the temperature dropped sharply, his breath visible in the air. He heard a faint scream, Jenny's voice, he was sure of it, and he sprinted the final stretch. Reaching the bathroom, he found the door slightly ajar, the inside dark and quiet, too quiet. "Jenny?" he called out, his voice echoing off the tiled walls. There was no response, only the sound of dripping water somewhere in the shadows. He pushed the door fully open, his phone's flashlight piercing the darkness, revealing the devastation inside. Tiles and debris were scattered everywhere, and the stall door was indeed shut. Approaching cautiously, he reached out, hesitating for a moment before flinging it open. It revealed nothing but the remnants of the floor, now a gaping hole. Peering into the abyss, Mark felt a dizzying sense of vertigo as the edges seemed to undulate, whispering voices beckoning him closer. Steeling himself, he shouted into the void, "Jenny, are you down there?" His voice was swallowed by the darkness, the echoes distorted as if mocking him. Behind him, the corridor was filling with more students, drawn by curiosity and the alarm raised by his rushed exit from the gym. They crowded at the door, peering over his shoulder into the eerie scene. Suddenly, a low, rumbling growl emanated from the hole, silencing the whispers and causing the onlookers to step back in fear. The ground shook, and a cold wind blasted out from the depths, carrying with it a pungent, earthy smell. From within the dark, something moved, a shadow at first, then taking a more definite form. It was a figure, crawling slowly up from the darkness, its features obscured, its movements jerky and unnatural. As the figure emerged into the dim light of the bathroom, it became clear it was not Jenny. The creature, for it could only be described as such, was humanoid but grotesque, its skin pallid and wet, eyes hollow and unseeing. It paused, as if disoriented, then turned its head towards Mark and the others, opening its mouth to reveal a gaping maw lined with sharp, jagged teeth. The students recoiled in horror, some screaming, others frozen in place. Mark, heart pounding, backed away slowly, his mind racing. He needed to find Jenny, but first, he had to get everyone to safety. He shouted for the students to run, to get out of the building, his voice barely audible over the sounds of the creature's growls and the renewed whispers echoing from the void. As chaos erupted, with students scrambling in every direction, Mark took one last look into the hole, hoping for a sign of Jenny. Instead, he saw multiple pairs of gleaming eyes beginning to ascend from the darkness, and he knew then that the nightmare had only just begun. Mark, amidst the chaos, made a split-second decision. He grabbed a piece of broken tile from the floor and hurled it at the creature, hitting it squarely in the head. The creature staggered but didn't fall. Instead, it let out an anguished howl that seemed to shake the very walls of the bathroom. The sound was so terrifying that it momentarily halted the students in their tracks, their instincts torn between flight and the paralyzing fear that rooted them to the spot. Mark used the creature's momentary disorientation to his advantage, shouting at the students again, "Move! Get out of here!" This time, his command cut through their fear, and they stumbled away, racing down the corridor towards the emergency exits. Mark followed, making sure no one was left behind, but as he reached the hallway, he glanced back towards the bathroom. The creature was advancing, more of its kind appearing from the depths, their eyes glowing with a hungry light. As they approached the main entrance, another tremor rocked the building, stronger than before. Cracks spread across the walls and ceiling, debris falling around them. It was clear the school itself was succumbing to whatever malevolent force had been unleashed. Outside, the fog had thickened into an almost impenetrable wall. Mark and the other students emerged into it, coughing and squinting, trying to make out their surroundings. The school bus was nearby, abandoned by the driver in the chaos. Mark directed the students towards it. "Get on the bus! We need to get as far away from here as possible," he instructed. Once he was sure all the students who had followed him were aboard, Mark turned to the driver's seat, intending to drive the bus himself. As he placed his hand on the door, a chilling realization stopped him cold. Jenny was still inside the school. His heart raced as he weighed his responsibility towards the frightened students on the bus against the need to save his best friend. Determined, Mark made a decision. He turned to Sarah, a fellow senior known for her level-headedness, and handed her the keys. "Get them to safety. Call for help as soon as you're clear of this place. I have to go back for Jenny." Without waiting for a response, he turned and ran back towards the school, the screams of the creatures echoing behind him as if in pursuit. Entering the building once more, he headed straight for the bathroom. The ground continued to shake, and with each tremor, Mark felt as if the school was sinking deeper into an abyss. Reaching the bathroom, he found the hole now larger, the edges crumbling away. The creatures were no longer there, they had spread into the school, their roars and growls a horrifying chorus that filled the hallways. Mark peered into the void, calling for Jenny with a desperation that choked his voice. Suddenly, from deep within the darkness, a faint voice called back. "Mark!" It was Jenny. Relief flooded through him, followed quickly by renewed fear for her safety. "Hold on, Jenny! I'm coming!" Mark shouted. He looked around for something to use to descend into the void safely, but found nothing. The building moaned ominously, warning him of its impending collapse. Mark took a deep breath, his decision made. He was going to save Jenny, no matter what. He swung his legs over the edge and began to lower himself into the darkness, his hands finding precarious holds on the jagged edges of the hole. As he descended, the sounds from above grew fainter, replaced by the whispers and cries from below, calling to him, tempting him, threatening him. But Mark's focus was clear. He was going to bring Jenny back, or they would both be lost to the darkness forever. As Mark descended further into the abyss, the air grew colder and the darkness enveloped him, thick and suffocating. The whispers became louder, a cacophony of voices that seemed to claw at his mind, trying to instill fear and doubt. He gritted his teeth and pressed on, his hands searching the rough walls for holds, his feet dangling into the unknown. Above him, the faint sounds of the school continued to deteriorate, the groans of the building's agony barely reaching his ears. Below, an eerie glow began to emanate, casting a faint light in the darkness. It wasn't comforting, it was a sickly green, shimmering off the walls and creating grotesque shadows. "Jenny!" Mark called out again, his voice echoing against the stone. This time, her reply was closer, more urgent. "Mark! Be careful!" He paused, listening intently. The voices around him twisted her words, mimicking her voice in a mocking tone, but he pushed their taunts aside. His feet finally touched ground, a solid, albeit uneven, surface that seemed to be made of the same stone as the walls. The green light was stronger here, emanating from a series of cracks in the earth that formed a network across the cavern floor. Mark squinted in the dim light, trying to locate Jenny. There, to his right, he saw movement, a figure huddled against the wall, her arms wrapped around her knees. "Jenny," he rushed over, his relief immense when he saw it was indeed her, though she looked pale and frightened. "Mark, you shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's too dangerous. They want to keep us here, forever. We're getting out of here, together," Mark asserted, helping her to her feet. As they prepared to make their way back, a low rumble filled the cavern, the green light pulsating like the heartbeat of the abyss itself. The ground shook violently, throwing them off balance. From the cracks, more creatures began to emerge, their forms more terrifying than the ones above, misshapen, their limbs twisted, their eyes glowing with that same eerie green light. They moved towards Mark and Jenny, their intentions clear. Mark grabbed a large rock from the ground, using it to fend off the nearest creature. Jenny found a sharp-edged stone and did the same. Together, they fought, slowly making their way towards the wall they had descended. But with each step, more creatures emerged, relentless and seemingly unending. "We need another way out," Jenny panted, ducking as a creature lunged at her. Mark scanned the cavern, noticing for the first time that the network of cracks seemed to converge towards a singular point on the far side of the cavern. There, the light was brightest, and the air seemed to ripple as if heated by an invisible fire. "There," he pointed. "We make for that point. It might be another exit." Dodging and weaving through the creatures, they made their way towards the light. The ground continued to shake, and parts of the ceiling began to crumble, dust and debris falling around them. It was a perilous journey, each step fraught with danger, but the potential escape fueled their desperate hope. As they reached the center of the light, the ground beneath them felt different, warmer and smoother. The light pulsed stronger, and a gust of wind rose from the cracks, carrying whispers not of threat, but of ancient sadness and longing. The creatures hesitated, stopping at the edge of the light, their forms flickering as if unable to enter. "Quick, this way!" Mark urged, pulling Jenny into the center of the light. As they stepped forward, the ground beneath them shifted, opening up to reveal a ladder leading down into yet another level of darkness. But this time, there was a promise of an end, a faint hint of fresh air wafting from below. Without hesitation, they climbed down, the light fading above them, sealing them in with a new layer of darkness as they descended into the unknown depths, their fate uncertain, their resolve unbroken. Descending the ladder into the deeper darkness, Mark and Jenny felt the air change around them, growing colder yet somehow fresher with each rung they passed. The faint hint of fresh air became stronger, more tangible, as if it was leading them towards a possible escape. The narrow vertical tunnel they were navigating seemed ancient, the walls rough and moist to the touch, lined with a strange sort of moss that glowed faintly, providing a minimal light source. The ladder ended abruptly, and they dropped down onto a damp, rocky floor. This new level was different from the cavern above. It was a natural tunnel, the walls curving inward, forming a sort of underground passage. The air here was tinged with the smell of the ocean, salty and wet, suggesting that they might be beneath the coastal cliffs near their town. "Can you hear that?" Jenny whispered, pausing to listen. The distant sound of waves crashing against rocks reached their ears, a sound both heartening and haunting in their current predicament. Mark nodded, his voice filled with renewed hope. "The sea. We must be under the cliffside. If we follow the sound, it might lead us out." With Jenny close behind, Mark led the way, their progress slow as they navigated the slippery rocks and sudden dips in the floor. Every now and then, they would stop, listening for the sound of the sea, using it as their guide through the darkness. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, they began to notice remnants of old, rusted metal tracks embedded in the ground, and broken wooden beams scattered around. "Looks like an old smuggling tunnel," Mark surmised, recalling stories of smugglers in the area centuries ago. The tunnel began to slope downward, and the sound of the sea grew louder, more pronounced. It was a comforting sound, one that spoke of the outside world, of freedom. But with it came a new sound, a soft, melodic humming, echoing through the tunnel. The tune was unfamiliar, hauntingly beautiful, yet it sent shivers down their spines. "Where is that coming from?" Jenny asked, her voice tense. Mark shook his head, unable to determine its source. "I don't know, but let's keep moving. We're close, I can feel it." They continued, the humming growing louder as they approached what looked like a fork in the tunnel. One path veered off towards the louder sound of the waves, while the other descended further into darkness, the humming emanating strongly from that direction. Mark paused, torn. The logical choice was to follow the sound of the waves, but something about the humming intrigued him, pulling at him almost hypnotically. He looked at Jenny, seeing the same conflict reflected in her eyes. "We should split up," Jenny suggested hesitantly. "I'll follow the waves. You take the humming path. We'll cover more ground." Mark knew it was logical, but the idea of separating filled him with dread. Yet, before he could protest, Jenny was moving down the tunnel towards the sound of the sea, her figure quickly swallowed up by the darkness. Left alone, Mark turned towards the path from where the humming came. As he walked, the air grew warmer, the humming louder, more compelling. It seemed to be calling to him, a siren song in the depths of the earth. The path led to a small chamber, the center of which glowed with an ethereal light. In the middle of the light, a figure danced gracefully, its movements fluid and mesmerizing. Mark stood transfixed, unable to move, his mind caught between the desire to approach and the instinct to flee. As he watched, the figure stopped dancing and turned towards him, its eyes glowing with the same eerie light. A smile spread across its face, welcoming yet unnerving. "Welcome, traveler," the figure spoke, its voice echoing the melodic tune. "You have come far, but the journey is not yet over." Mark felt a chill run through him as the figure stepped closer, the room around him beginning to spin, the walls blurring into streaks of light and shadow. As the walls spun, Mark's head swam with vertigo, his senses overwhelmed by the blending of light and shadow. The figure before him, now clearer in the ethereal glow, seemed almost otherworldly, its features both beautiful and terrifying. "Who are you?" Mark managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper against the hum that filled the chamber. The figure smiled, its face shifting subtly as if made of water, ever-changing and fluid. "I am the keeper of paths, the guide for lost souls. You have wandered far from your world, traveler. What seeks you in the depths of forgotten ways?" Mark, trying to steady his spinning head, focused on the figure's question. "I'm trying to find my way out, to save my friend and myself from whatever is happening in the school above." The figure nodded, the hum intensifying around them. "The paths you choose lead to more than mere escape. They are entwined with your fate, and the choices you make here ripple across realities." Mark felt the weight of the figure's words, a sense of destiny pressing upon him. "How do I choose the right path?" "Listen to the voices of the ancient tunnels," the figure advised. "Follow the song that resonates with your heart. But beware, for some songs are meant to lead astray." As the humming subsided slightly, Mark listened intently. There were now multiple tunes, each emanating from various tunnels that branched off from the chamber. One tune, deep and resonant, seemed familiar, pulling at him with a sense of urgency and warmth. Another was the haunting melody that had led him here, filled with beauty but now tinged with a coldness that made him shiver. Deciding to trust his instincts, Mark chose the path of the deep, resonant tune. He glanced back at the figure, seeking confirmation. "Is this the way?" The figure's smile deepened, a mysterious glint in its eyes. "All paths are the way, and none are. The journey is yours to walk, and the end is yours to discover." With a nod, Mark turned and followed the tunnel from which the deep tune flowed. As he walked, the light from the chamber faded, and he was enveloped once again in darkness, with only the glow of the moss on the walls to guide him. The tune became clearer, a melody of depth that seemed to vibrate through the ground under his feet. Meanwhile, Jenny, following the sound of crashing waves, found her path sloping steeply downwards. The air grew misty, the salt smell stronger now, promising proximity to the sea. The tunnel ended abruptly at a large cavern whose walls were partially open to the ocean. The waves crashed against the rocks below, spray reaching up to where Jenny stood. She searched the cavern for any sign of an exit that would lead up to the cliffs above. Among the rocks, she noticed a rope ladder, old and worn, dangling from a higher ledge. As she approached it, she heard a soft, mournful wail from above, like the wind singing through the cavern. Looking up, she saw nothing but the dark outline of the cliffs against the starry sky. Jenny grasped the ladder, testing its strength before beginning her ascent. Each step was precarious, the ladder swaying with the force of the wind and the spray of the waves. Above her, the mournful wail continued, now mixed with what sounded like a voice calling her name, lost in the howling of the wind. As Mark delved deeper into his chosen tunnel and Jenny climbed toward the cliff top, both felt a deepening connection to their paths, unaware of how closely their fates were intertwined with the ancient, whispering tunnels and the mysterious forces at play in the depths of the earth. As Mark followed the deep, resonant tune through the twisting tunnel, each step seemed to lead him deeper into the heart of the earth. The hum vibrated through the stone, aligning with his own heartbeat, a rhythm that seemed both foreign and familiar. Gradually, the tunnel widened into a vast underground hall, its ceiling lost in shadows. At the center of the hall, a pool of water reflected the faint, glowing moss. The tune emanated from the pool, its depths murky yet strangely inviting. Meanwhile, Jenny's climb was fraught with danger. The rope ladder creaked ominously with each gust of wind, but she persevered, driven by the voice that seemed to call out to her from above. Finally, reaching the cliff top, she collapsed onto the grass, breathing heavily, the sea's roar below now just a distant rumble. The voice had guided her here, and as she looked around, she noticed an old, weather-beaten path leading away from the cliff and back towards the town. The voice, now clearer, urged her on, "This way, come home." Back in the underground hall, Mark approached the pool, drawn by the melody. As he neared, the water stirred, and from its depths rose a figure, not menacing but solemn, an ancient being clad in robes that seemed woven from the very darkness of the cave. "You have followed the true tune," it spoke, its voice echoing the hum. "But the path home is not yet clear. You must take from here the stone of choosing." It extended its hand, revealing a small, luminescent stone, pulsing with light. Mark took the stone hesitantly, feeling its power surge through him, a power that connected him to the earth and the paths he had walked. "What must I do with this?" he asked. "To end the nightmare, you must reunite this stone with its counterpart, held by another who walks a path parallel to yours," the figure instructed. As it spoke, an image of Jenny flashed across the surface of the water, showing her standing on the cliff's edge, the wind in her hair, looking towards home. Understanding dawned on Mark. "Jenny," he whispered. He thanked the ancient being and rushed back through the tunnel, the stone's glow lighting his way, its pull now directing him towards Jenny. Jenny, following the old path, found herself inexplicably walking towards the school. As she approached, she saw Mark emerging from the forest, running towards her. They met in front of the school, the site of their nightmare, both out of breath but relieved. Mark showed her the stone, and Jenny instinctively reached into her pocket, pulling out a matching stone she didn't remember taking but felt she had always carried. As they held the stones together, the two stones pulsed with light, and a wave of energy washed over the school. The fog lifted, the darkness receded, and the oppressive feeling that had haunted the halls was gone. "We did it," Mark said, hardly believing. Jenny nodded, a smile breaking through her exhaustion. "Let's go home." As they walked away from the school, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, casting light on the new path they would now forge together, free from the shadows that had chased them through the night. Their nightmare had ended, but their journey, marked by courage and bound by a newfound strength, was just beginning.